Welcome back. I'm glad you're here. Tonight's story is not about a miracle you can see, but about a struggle you can feel. It's about Saint Francis of Assisi, not the gentle figure surrounded by birds, but the human being who once carried resentment so deeply that prayer itself refused to move forward. This is the story of a night when Francis faced the hardest command of Christ, and the prayer that nearly broke him. When people speak about Saint Francis of Assisi, they often speak in symbols. Birds. Wolves. Miracles. But the earliest Franciscan writers, those who knew him personally, describe a man far more unsettling than the legends. They describe a man who fought. A man who suffered humiliation. A man who carried resentment longer than he wanted to admit. And they describe moments of prayer so difficult that Francis himself later said they felt like a kind of interior crucifixion. This is one of those moments. Not a vision. Not a miracle. But a night historians believe truly happened. When Francis confronted the one command of Christ he could not escape. Love your enemies. Francis was not born gentle. He was born the son of Pietro di Bernard I, a wealthy cloth merchant. He enjoyed fine clothes, songs, and admiration. He wanted glory. When war broke out between Assisi and Perugia around 1202, Francis joined eagerly. This is not legend, it is documented history. The war ended disastrously for Assisi. Francis was captured and imprisoned for nearly a year. The prison was not a dungeon as we imagine it today. But it was cold, humiliating, and crowded. Francis fell seriously ill there. Some biographers believe this illness permanently weakened his body. Others believe it cracked something deeper. When he returned home, Francis was no hero. He was defeated. Poor in spirit. And angry. He did not speak openly of hatred. But resentment does not always shout. Sometimes it waits. Francis's conversion was gradual. He did not become holy overnight. He struggled. He hesitated. He doubted. Early sources like Thomas of Celano describe Francis wrestling with prayer, especially with passages that demanded inner transformation rather than outward acts. One teaching disturbed him deeply. Pray for those who persecute you. This was not theoretical for Francis. He knew the faces of the men who mocked him. He remembered the hunger. The sickness. The sense of being forgotten. Years later, even after embracing poverty, Francis realized something uncomfortable. He had given up money. He had given up status. He had even given up pride. But he had not given up resentment. According to early Franciscan tradition, Francis spent many nights alone in prayer. Not mystical ecstasy, but silence, repetition, exhaustion. One such night, Francis stopped mid-psalm. He later described feeling resisted, as if prayer itself would not move forward. This is significant in Franciscan spirituality. They believed God sometimes withheld consolation to demand obedience. Francis understood. There were names he had never spoken in prayer. The men from Perugia. The guards. The voices that laughed while he lay ill. That night, Francis realized prayer would not continue until he confronted this. Francis knelt for hours without words. This was not peace. It was struggle. He did not feel love. He did not feel mercy. He felt resistance. Then, according to tradition preserved by later friars, Francis spoke aloud, slowly, deliberately. Lord! You command what I do not feel. Give what you command. This prayer echoes Augustine and reflects medieval theology. It is historically plausible and deeply Franciscan. Francis then did something terrifying to the human heart. He named his enemies. One by one. Not asking for punishment. Not asking for justice. But blessing. Give them peace. Give them mercy. Give them life. Francis later said this felt like tearing something out of himself. And that is why it mattered. Nothing dramatic followed. No vision. No voice. No sign. But something ended. Francis rose from prayer different. According to Bonaventure, after this period Francis became notably incapable of resentment. He accepted insults without protest. He refused to speak harshly of anyone. This was not temperament. It was discipline. Forgiveness had reordered him. This moment explains much of Francis's later life. Why he forbade friars from judging sinners. Why he treated corrupt clergy with reverence. Why he insisted humility mattered more than justice. Francis understood something radical. Hatred binds the one who holds it. Forgiveness frees the one who releases it. Francis later taught his brothers something startling. Where there is hatred, we must plant love. Not because enemies deserve it, but because we need it. Early Franciscan writings emphasize that Francis believed hatred damaged prayer itself. You could not ask God for mercy while denying it to others. Saint Francis never claimed that forgiveness felt holy. He never said it brought immediate peace. He never pretended it erased memory or pain. What he learned that night was something far more difficult. Forgiveness does not begin in comfort. It begins in obedience. Francis discovered that the greatest resistance to God is not disbelief, but the quiet refusal to release what we believe we are entitled to hold. Our anger. Our resentment. Our sense of justice. Our right to remember who hurt us. And yet, the gospel never asks us whether forgiveness is reasonable. It asks whether we are willing. Francis understood something that few people dare to face. As long as resentment remains, prayer becomes divided. The lips move, but the heart resists. The words rise, but they do not go far. That night, Francis did not feel love for his enemies. He felt grief. He felt fear. He felt loss. Because forgiveness often feels like losing the last thing that connects us to our suffering. But Francis also learned that resentment is not loyalty to pain. It is captivity. We think we are honoring the wound by holding on to it. But in truth, we are allowing it to shape us. Francis realized that hatred does not punish the one who caused harm. It reshapes the one who carries it. And so, when he spoke the names he avoided, when he prayed for the men who had humiliated him, something unseen but permanent occurred. Not outside him. Inside him. Forgiveness did not change his past. It changed his direction. The early Franciscan writers noticed this shift long after the night itself passed. They saw a man who no longer defended himself. A man who absorbed insult without bitterness. A man who treated enemies and friends with the same humility. This was not weakness. It was freedom. Francis had discovered that hatred demands constant energy. It must be fed, remembered, rehearsed. Forgiveness, once chosen, requires only surrender. And surrender is the deepest form of strength. Francis would later teach his brothers that the soul becomes light not by avoiding suffering, but by refusing to let suffering dictate love. He believed that holiness was not achieved by extraordinary acts, but by interior obedience when no one is watching. That night, there were no witnesses. No record was written. No story was told. But heaven saw. Francis learned that forgiveness does not mean calling evil good. It means refusing to let evil have the final word. He also learned something even more unsettling. God does not force forgiveness. He waits. Grace stands at the edge of the heart, patient, silent, respectful. It does not break the door down. It does not argue. It waits for consent. And that is why forgiveness feels terrifying. Because it must be chosen freely. Francis chose it without consolation. Without certainty. Without reward. He chose it because Christ asked. He chose it because Christ asked. And that choice shaped everything that followed. The peace people admired in Francis did not come from innocence. It came from surrender. He was peaceful because he had nothing left to defend. This is why his story matters. Because most of us will never be asked to renounce wealth or preach in the streets. But all of us will be asked to forgive someone who does not deserve it. And when that moment comes, we will stand exactly where Francis stood. At the threshold between obedience and resistance. Between freedom and captivity. Between prayer that flows and prayer that stops. Saint Francis teaches us that forgiveness is not the end of pain. It is the end of isolation. It is the moment the soul stops standing alone in its suffering and allows God to enter. And sometimes, the holiest prayer we will ever speak is not one that feels sincere. It is simply this. Lord, I do not feel love. But I choose to will it. Give what you command. That prayer still changes lives. And it still sets hearts free.